This is the I Don't Want a Divorce podcast with Dr. David E. Clarke. Starting a brand new series on this podcast. It's based on my book, Married But Lonely. This session is entitled, I Married an Intimacy Avoider. Does Married But Lonely describe you? Are you married to a good person, but a person who will not be emotionally and spiritually intimate with you? A person who has resisted all your attempts to develop closeness? If so, these podcasts are for you. If they resonate with you, these podcasts, I recommend you get my book, Married But Lonely, and go through the 7 steps together. You'll find the book on my website, davideclarkephd.com. That's Clarke with an E. All my books are on the website, of course. For every possible marriage problem, Dr. David E. Clarke has a book. You'll also find my phone advice, email advice, marriage intensives. I do 2-day marriage intensives and now doing more individual intensives for folks who need to heal from a traumatic situation in their marriage or personal life, or to find a strategy to do a tough love approach with their spouse that wants out of a marriage. Now, my theory is, and I haven't seen it be disproven over 33 years of clinical practice, is if your spouse is a good person and he loves you, my Married But Lonely strategy will work. If he's not a good person and he doesn't love you, then he's going to refuse to follow this Married But Lonely strategy. You're going to give him every opportunity. That's part of why I wrote the book. Here's an opportunity to prove you're not a dirtball and that you do love me. But if he does resist, he or she, frankly, that means you're in a different situation. That's emotional abuse. And I have a book for that situation too. Enough is enough, how to leave an abusive relationship. Well, let's move into this Married But Lonely material. Now, to every woman reading this, regardless of income, social level, or educational background, the chances are very good that your husband has no idea of how you want him to get close to you. My research over the past 2 decades, frankly 3 decades, as a clinical psychologist and as a speaker, presenting marriage seminars nationwide, doing marriage intensives, shows that 85% of all husbands have no clue when it comes to achieving closeness with their wives. However, to make absolutely sure, take my Intimacy Avoider quiz. I call it the IA quiz, Intimacy Avoider. Get it? Now, 2 caveats before I begin this quiz. First one is that in most marriages, the husband is in fact the intimacy avoider. But about 15% of the time, the wife is the intimacy avoider. So keep that in mind as we go through the quiz. For ease of communication in these podcasts, and actually in the book too, I'll assume the husband is the intimacy avoider, when, of course, it could be the wife. The other caveat is this: as I read this quiz, I want you to be honest. Change begins with honesty. Be honest with God, me, yourself, and your spouse. If you're honest, this is the day your marriage can begin to change. And if you're living with an intimacy avoider, and I'll bet you are, almost always one person in the relationship is an IA, an intimacy avoider, then have your intimacy avoider listen to this podcast with you and be honest. We're not throwing stones. We're just trying to identify we have a problem. Here's the quiz. True, false. These are true, false statements. He is content with low levels of intimacy in the marriage. He does not talk in a personal, heart-to-heart way with you. He holds his emotions and deep thoughts inside. Well, true or false? His idea of quality time is having you sit next to him while he watches TV. In fact, for many men, sitting in the same room with you, not even talking, is quality time, or both at home in separate rooms can be quality time. Of course, that's not true, but he thinks it is. He seems to love his TV, computer, and job and phone more than he loves you. He believes the only purpose of romance was to get you to marry him. After the wedding, he dropped it. The only time he's passionate is during sex. He has the listening skills of a tree stump. He's into conservation of words. He sees no point in using 25 words when 1 or 2 will do. And again, this is a good guy. This is not a bad guy. This is a good guy who loves you. You have come to realize that 99% of his entire conversational repertoire with you consists of these 20 statements. Fine. Okay. Pretty good. Sure. I don't know. Nothing's wrong. I don't want to talk about it. I said I was sorry. Get over it. You're overreacting. You shouldn't feel that way. I forgot. I never said that. It's that time of the month, isn't it? Women love that one. How about some sex, baby? What's on television? Do we have to visit your parents again? Where are my socks? What's for dinner? What did you say? Here's another true-false question. Actually, 5 more. He would rather face a firing squad than talk through a conflict with you. In fact, many men fight conflict like the plague. He does love you, but cannot express love in ways that make you feel loved. He is happy as long as you give him sex, food, clean clothes, and the remote control. He thinks you have a great marriage. He has no idea why you're upset and unhappy. If you answered true to at least 10 of these statements, you are married to an IA, an intimacy avoider. Because this is usually a male trait throughout this book, throughout this series of podcasts, I refer to the husband as the intimacy avoider. Now again, some of you husbands listening to this podcast will realize, hey, my wife is an intimacy avoider. That's fine. It's fair. 15% of the couples I see, the woman is in fact the intimacy avoider. The same principles apply. Now, my strategy also applies to those in serious dating relationships and engaged couples. Before you get married, it's a good idea to make sure your partner can connect with you on a deeper level. Now, your man, this man I'm talking about who's an intimacy avoider, isn't a bad guy. He's not mean or evil, hasn't killed anyone, and doesn't run over squirrels for sport. He is a moral, decent, and upright person who works hard at his job. He is not having an affair. He is not an alcoholic or a drug user, nor is he addicted to anything. He does not verbally or physically abuse you. He is solid, stable, and responsible. He is a good guy. He even loves you. You know he loves you. The one problem with him, and it's a big one, is that he doesn't love you the way you need to be loved. He doesn't meet your deepest, most important need as a wife, to be emotionally connected to him. He doesn't open up and share himself with you. His feelings, personal thoughts, problems, worries, spiritual life, hopes, and dreams all stay buried inside. He is intimacy challenged. The one area in which he seems to be able to give himself to you is sex. During foreplay or intercourse, he can be warm, sensitive, and loving. But frankly, that isn't good enough. You need him to give himself to you emotionally. Physical love without emotional connection is difficult, even painful for you, and does not meet your greatest need. So if this describes your marriage, you really and truly don't know your own husband, and you desperately actually need to know him. That is why you married him, to be close to him. You need to know and experience who he really is inside. And you need him to know and experience who you really are inside. You may be thinking that hasn't happened in my marriage, and it doesn't look as though it's ever going to happen. For true intimacy to happen, it takes 2 people, both spouses. This means he has to talk on a personal level. He has to put aside his logic and let his emotions come out. He has to open up and share with you his personal stuff on a regular basis. It's not good enough for him to say, well, I'm just a man. I don't do that. No, that will doom your marriage to no intimacy. As a woman, you know this is true because you understand how intimacy works. But he just doesn't seem to get it. And he certainly isn't joining you in this intimacy process. You feel stuck at square one because your man won't talk to you on a personal level. The truth is your man is emotionally stunted. He hides his true self behind an incredibly thick, seemingly impenetrable wall. He may even be a pretty expressive guy with a great sense of humor. I've known many men who have no trouble talking, but they close down when it comes to any personal below-the-surface exchanges. That's where intimacy is, underneath the surface, in the deeper personal areas. He doesn't want to go there. He doesn't know how to go there. This series of podcasts and the book, Married But Lonely, will help you get there. Oh, he'll talk, but only about things that are safe and superficial, generalities about his day, facts, events, logical observations, financial matters, his schedule, home maintenance, the kids, or vacation plans. These are the kinds of things he could share with anyone. A friend, his dad, mom, or brother, or the mail carrier. but you're his wife. You need more than this. Now, as I mentioned before in the quiz, your husband is happy in your marriage. If you asked him right now, in fact, you can ask him right now, honey, how do you think our marriage is going? He'd say, great. He thinks you and he are close. And so since he's happy, he thinks you're happy. He can live on a much more superficial level of intimacy than you can and be fine. You're sitting there thinking, as you listen to this podcast in your car or at home on your phone, this quiz describes my marriage. I am married but lonely. If you have the man listen to it, before you really tell him the truth about the marriage, he'll be thinking, man, I feel bad for the poor suckers in that kind of marriage. Whew, I'll pray for them. Our marriage is great. You know what? That's not true. So, we are going to embark on this series of podcasts, which I truly believe can revolutionize your marriage, taking it from good or okay to a deeper level of intimacy. Because I'm telling you, and you know this is true for many of you, where you're already losing love and respect for your IA, your intimacy avoider. If you don't get this done, if you don't motivate your spouse and teach him through the series of steps in Married But Lonely, how to get in it with you, you're going to lose your love, you're going to lose your respect. And in fact, you'll end up with not a good marriage, but a bad one. Miserable, resentful, depressed, not close. God doesn't want that for you. So, let's embark upon this series of podcasts together. I invite you to email me questions you may have, comments. We love to interact with our podcast listeners. Certainly, you can go to the website, davideclarkephd.com, Clarke with an E, to access the Married But Lonely book, to access these podcasts, to check out my individual and marital intensives, my phone advice services. Everything's on there, even videos of me in person. So, next time, we'll continue with Married But Lonely. I want to make these podcasts as interactive and helpful as possible. I don't know what you're going through specifically. Of course, you do. So I would love to get your questions, and I'll be answering those in future podcasts as we go along. So ask Dr. Clarke at gmail.com is where you send your questions. Also, any topic for a podcast that you'd like me to cover, something in your marriage, something in your personal life. Again, I'd love to get those topics. And again, same email address for those. If you have a question for me that you'd like me to answer during a podcast, or if you have a topic you'd like me to cover in a podcast, ask Dr. Clarke at gmail.com. Ask Dr. Clarke at gmail.com.